Deep within the Harz mountains of Germany, where the air was thick with rock dust and the constant ring of picks echoed through tunnels, silver miners in the 16th century began to cough with a peculiar violence. Their throats tightened as if gripped by an invisible claw, and a strange, coppery bitterness coated their tongues. They named this phantom ailment the Huttenkatze, the hut cat, for the way it seemed to sit on their chests, stealing their breath in the oppressive heat of the smelting huts. The source was invisible, a fine white powder that glittered in the torchlight as ore was crushed and heated. With every furnace blast, clouds of arsenic trioxide dust billowed from the roasting piles, settling in the miners' lungs and on their sweat-damp skin. They wiped the metallic grit from their lips, unaware that each breath drew the poison deeper, where it began to ravage tissues, causing the raw, choking sensation they could not escape. For generations, the hut cat was simply a grim fact of life in the mines, a mysterious plague accepted as part of the silver's price. No one yet connected the brilliant metal pulled from the earth with the toxic vapor released in its purification. This was arsenic's quiet industrial debut in the modern age, not as a weapon, but as an occupational hazard, its danger masked by routine and the relentless pursuit of wealth. From the choking dust of German mines, arsenic travelled to gilded halls. In the candle-lit corridors of 17th-century palaces, a courtier's gloved hand might slip a pinch of fine white powder into a rival's wine. They called it inheritance powder, odorless, tasteless, and devastatingly effective. Its symptoms mirrored common afflictions, violent cramps, relentless vomiting, and dehydration that could kill within days, looking for all the world like a sudden, severe cholera. The poison's appeal lay in its cruel mimicry. A victim would retire after supper, complaining of a sour stomach. By midnight, their sheets were soaked with sweat as their gut twisted. Physicians summoned to the bedside would diagnose bad humours or spoiled food, never suspecting the calculated dose that was shutting down their patient's cellular machinery, blocking the energy production essential for life. This chemical deception made arsenic the perfect political tool. A sudden death in a powerful family could rearrange fortunes and shift alliances overnight, with no evidence left but a cold body. The powder flowed through secret networks, from alchemists' workshops to jeweled rings with hidden compartments, transforming a toxic element into an instrument of silent, untraceable power. The white powder that had once been a secret of the aristocracy now found its way into the hands of ordinary Parisians. By the 1700s, the back rooms of French apothecaries held small, unlabelled drawers. Inside, the pure, glittering crystals of arsenic trioxide were deliberately adulterated, mixed with soot or charcoal to create a gritty, greyish powder that was harder to trace and easier to sell. A shopkeeper might slide a paper packet across the counter to a harried housewife, calling it poudre de succession, inheritance powder, with a knowing glance. Officially, it was a potent rodenticide, but the euphemism was a transparent wink. Everyone understood its other, darker purpose. For a few coins, a domestic nuisance or a personal one could be quietly eliminated. This commercial availability democratized murder. The poison was no longer confined to palace intrigues. Now, a disgruntled heir in a provincial town or a merchant wishing to be rid of a business partner could acquire it as easily as buying a loaf of bread. The white mineral from German mines had become a common, terrifying tool in the heart of French society. For centuries, arsenic had been the perfect, invisible killer, but in a cluttered London laboratory in 1836, that invisibility began to dissolve. James Marsh, a chemist working for the Royal Arsenal, was frustrated. He had just witnessed a murder trial collapse because the crude chemical tests for arsenic in a victim's stomach had failed to convince the jury. The poison had slipped through science's fingers once again. Marsh bent over his workbench, assembling a delicate apparatus of glass tubes and flasks. His idea was elegant: convert any arsenic present in a sample into a gas. He would pass this gas, arsine, over a heated piece of porcelain. If arsenic was there, it would not vanish into the air. Instead, it would deposit itself as a thin, unmistakable silvery black mirror on the white ceramic surface. The test was devastatingly sensitive. A few grains of arsenic, hidden in a cup of coffee or a slice of cake, could now be hunted down in tissue, in hair, in the very organs of the deceased. That metallic mirror was a silent physical accusation. For the first time in history, the ghost of the poison was forced to materialize, providing a reliable witness that could stand in a court of law. The courtroom in Toul, France, fell silent as the prosecutor placed a small glass apparatus on the evidence table. This was the Marsh test, fresh from James Marsh's laboratory, and it was about to face its first major public trial. 24-year-old Marie Lafarge stood accused of murdering her husband Charles by baking arsenic into his cake. The prosecution claimed the test would prove what her neighbours already whispered. Weeks earlier, in a grim churchyard, workers had exhumed Charles Lafarge's body. A chemist prepared tissue samples, adding zinc and acid to the glass vessel. A telltale, silvery black deposit formed on its cool interior, the signature of arsenic. Yet the defense immediately attacked the procedure. Had the soil around the coffin contaminated the remains? Were the reagents themselves pure? The scientific certainty promised by the test began to tarnish under cross-examination. The jury, presented with this novel but disputed evidence, convicted Marie Lafarge, yet they rejected the death penalty. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. The verdict was a compromise. The Marsh test had proven powerful enough to secure a conviction, but its messy real-world application revealed critical flaws. Forensic science had entered the courtroom, but its methods were not yet beyond doubt. The courtroom drama of Marie Lafarge faded, but arsenic's story was far from over. By the 1850s, the poison had slipped from the apothecary's jar and the murderer's hand into the very fabric of daily life. In Britain, a brilliant emerald green pigment called Scheele's green, made from copper arsenite, began colouring the Victorian world. It was cheap, vivid, and spectacularly toxic. Manufacturers brushed the vibrant powder onto everything. It tinted the luxurious wallpapers of middle-class parlours and dyed the flowing gowns of fashionable women. It coloured children's toys and the leaves of artificial flowers sold on street corners. In damp, poorly ventilated rooms, the pigment reacted with moisture in the air. A fine, poisonous dust of arsenic trioxide began to lift from the surfaces, settling invisibly on skin, furniture, and into lungs with every breath. No crime was intended here, only commerce. A family could be slowly poisoned simply by living in a beautifully decorated home or wearing the latest fashion. The danger was insidious, a constant, low-level exposure that accumulated in the body over months and years. The very symbol of Victorian domestic comfort and aesthetic beauty had become a silent, pervasive source of the same poison that had once been whispered about as inheritance powder. The vibrant green walls that had adorned Victorian parlours now became the subject of horrified scrutiny in medical journals. Physicians began connecting a constellation of symptoms: persistent nausea, painful skin lesions that refused to heal, and a creeping numbness in the extremities to the very homes where patients lived. A pattern emerged, documented in case after case, pointing not to contagion but to decoration. In one documented household, a child's chronic illness was finally traced to the nursery's fashionable wallpaper. Dampness in the room caused the arsenic-laden pigment to release a toxic dust, which the child inhaled night after night. The parents watched helplessly as their son developed ulcerated sores on his hands and suffered from debilitating stomach cramps, his condition a silent indictment of the era's aesthetic choices. Public alarm swelled as newspapers reprinted these medical findings. The call for regulation grew from a murmur to a demand, led by doctors and concerned citizens who argued that poison had no place in a family's sitting room or on a woman's gown. The crisis was no longer a series of isolated tragedies. It was a systemic failure, forcing society to confront the hidden cost of its favourite colour. As the Victorian era's green wallpaper was stripped from homes, arsenic's story took a sharp turn from poison to potential cure. In a Frankfurt laboratory, Paul Ehrlich hunched over his microscope, studying the spiral-shaped syphilis bacteria that ravaged bodies and minds. He envisioned a magic bullet, a compound that would target only the invader, leaving the patient unharmed. After 606 failed attempts, Ehrlich's team synthesized compound number 607. This arsenic-based molecule, which they named salvarsan, showed a remarkable property in test tubes. It immobilized the spirochetes. The challenge now was translating that lethal precision from glass to flesh, finding a dose that would kill the parasite but spare the human host. The treatment arrived not as a powder or a pill, but as a yellow solution drawn into a glass syringe. A physician would carefully inject it into a patient's muscle, initiating a delicate, toxic dance. The arsenic compound circulated, seeking out and binding to the bacteria, disrupting their metabolism. For the first time, a controlled dose of this ancient poison became a lifeline. The same element that had been weaponized in courts and hidden in Victorian wallpaper now revealed its most insidious nature, not as a poison administered by human hand, but as a geological curse. In the 1970s, international aid agencies launched a massive campaign across Bangladesh, drilling millions of tube wells deep into the earth to replace contaminated surface water. Villagers celebrated the clear, cool water that gushed from these hand-pumped wells, believing they had finally defeated waterborne diseases like cholera. For years, the poison worked invisibly. A farmer might first notice dark, hardened patches of skin on his palms, like calluses that wouldn't scrub away. A woman drawing water for her family could find strange, wart-like growths spreading across the soles of her feet. These were the first whispers of arsenicosis, the body slowly accumulating the toxin with every sip. The very wells meant to save lives were instead delivering a daily measured dose of dissolved arsenic, leached naturally from the Himalayan sediments far below. By the 1990s, the scale of the disaster became horrifyingly clear. What began with skin lesions escalated to cancers of the bladder, lung and skin, and crippling vascular diseases. Health surveys revealed entire villages where over half the population showed symptoms. This was no isolated incident, but a slow-motion epidemic, poisoning an estimated 30 to 70 million people through their most basic necessity, water drawn from a seemingly benevolent earth. The tragedy in Bangladesh revealed arsenic's most insidious modern face, not as a weapon, but as a silent geological contaminant. Yet even as its dangers were catalogued, the element's unique properties ensured it was never fully banished. In clean rooms across Silicon Valley, technicians handled ultra-pure arsenic, a critical dopant that gave semiconductors their precise electrical characteristics. The same substance that poisoned wells was enabling the digital age. This duality created a regulatory tightrope. Agencies like the World Health Organization set a strict limit, 10 micrograms per litre, for arsenic in drinking water, a threshold born from decades of epidemiological studies linking low-level exposure to cancers of the skin, bladder and lung. Food safety monitors scanned rice and apple juice, while environmental laws governed its disposal from the few remaining industrial processes, like wood preservation, where it was still permitted. The final, monumental challenge was not banning arsenic, but filtering it. In affected regions from Bangladesh to parts of the United States, scientists raced to engineer affordable solutions, filters using iron oxide nanoparticles to bind the toxin, or community-scale plants that could serve entire villages. The quest was to render a primordial poison inert, to separate it molecule by molecule from the water that sustains life.